Chapter 61, Hanyu and Friends, Hanyu's POV. For once, Hanyu didn't want to tell Kenta everything that had happened to him over the course of the last few days. What would he even say? Right after we all celebrated because Antony said he would keep me, I went back to our rooms and yelled at him about the worst thing that ever happened in his life. He went brain dead and then had a breakdown over it, and then told me his very sad life story, and we went to bed. I woke up from a nightmare and kissed him, which made him want to run away, because, for some mad reason, he didn't feel like kissing someone who had mocked him about his dead husband and lover 2 days before. Now I'm here because your friend is dead. Hooray! Luckily, Kenta didn't seem to feel especially chatty either. He'd welcomed Hanyu eagerly, and they'd immediately withdrawn to his rooms, where they'd crowded into his bed and Kenta had gone right to sleep. It was strange to feel him there, after all this time sharing his master's bed. Kenta was so obviously not Antony that Hanyu couldn't manage to drift off himself. He was bigger, of course, and warm. A bed got so hot with two people's warmth filling it. Kenta breathed as well, which was distractingly loud, and he slept flat on his back instead of curling up into a ball the way the god did. Hanyu missed Antony. He wouldn't have thought he was capable of missing Antony this much, however strongly he loved him. But now he knew the god so much better, and so of course he loved him more. It was all still so strange. What would all the priests back at the temple make of Lord Antony, one of the three, being so hopelessly devoted to human lovers, making a husband of one of them, and trying to raise another to godhood alongside himself, saying their names with more reverent worship than even the most devout priest could muster for his own? Far from being reverent himself, Hanyu had made a mockery of that love and pain. He really ought to stop going over it all in his mind. It was easy enough to see where he'd gone wrong tonight. Just because his master had permitted him in the bed and held him after his nightmare, it didn't mean that he was forgiven. He'd spat on Antony's memories of some of the most important people in his life and used the god's obvious guilt as a weapon. Hanyu wouldn't have wanted to kiss someone like that either. "Forgive me, Valerius," he thought as he nestled against Kenta's overly warm body. "You too, Sana. You didn't deserve that from me, and neither did he. I'm sorry I wasn't very kind to your Antony. I'll be better." It was silly to make silent apologies to dead people, he supposed, but he felt a little better and managed to drift off to an uneasy sleep. At least there were no more dreams. He felt tired and cranky when he woke and followed Kenta out to breakfast, but that didn't turn out to be a problem. All of Lord Theodora's attendants looked sleepy and glum. Even Gyuri seemed subdued, and the god herself was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't just the attendants, Hanyu realized as he accepted a bowl and sat down next to Kenta. Bunta was tucked tightly against a bald man who Hanyu didn't think he'd ever met before, but who regarded him so intently that he ended up staring into his oatmeal as he ate it. "Look at that," one of the men, Hiseo, if he remembered right, said, breaking the heavy silence. "They still managed to get a meal together without Zenji breathing down their necks." "Shut up," the bald man replied, with a little actual bite in his voice. "It's just oatmeal." It was very good oatmeal, Hanyu thought, but he wasn't in the mood to start any disputes. Joji rushed to interject. "Well, we're very pleased to have guests. Zenji and Hanyu, you're always welcome faces." "Yes, of course." Another, the older men, dredged up a wan, sleepy smile. "Even if your host is missing, where's Lord Theodora? I just got through my turn piloting, so I missed quite a bit last night." Bunta grimaced. "She's with Lord Antony." "Oh." The other man looked surprised, but recovered himself quickly. "I suppose the ship has to go on. Do you think he wants us to change course?" "Doubtful." Joji shook his head. "We've got to be headed for the island, and I can't imagine he'd have us veer off course now." Despite his foul mood, Hanyu found himself swept up in admiration for these men who spoke with such casual authority about the ship's destination. They were so important, and Kenta was training to be one of them. He shot a glance at his friend, suddenly awed. He hadn't even realized what was being said until Kenta asked, "What island?" Hiseo grinned. "Oh, right, we have a newcomer. It's a tiny little island. You could walk from one end to the other in a day, all covered in rocks. No one lives there, so the gods keep an underground storehouse." An underground storehouse? Hanyu breathed. Joji nodded. They don't usually bring any of us ashore, but Lord Theodora took Chihiro with her once, and he said it was amazing. There are huge crates of clothes, oils, dry goods, ropes, fishing nets, everything you could imagine. He said there were thousands and thousands of books. That was why she brought him, actually. They traded out all the romances they'd already read for new ones. Hanyu wondered whether any of the stories he'd read had been part of that haul. He also wondered how much wheedling he would have to do before Antony agreed to bring him to the underground storehouse. No, he shouldn't even think about trying to beg for any privileges until he knew how much trouble he was in. He needed to make things right with Antony before he worried about sating his thirst to see new places and things. Still, his mind buzzed with thoughts of the island and its storehouse as he trapezed above deck with Kenta for their exercises. Did it contain magical items from the god's homeland? Coins stamped with the face of Antony's father? Bones of the sea monsters they'd killed? Spoils from the unimaginable lands in the animal books? Hanyu was jerked back to the moment when Kenta whispered in his ear. "Giri looks awfully pretty today, don't you think?" he asked. Hanyu tried to think back to breakfast. The woman was always so silent, he tended to forget she was even there. "Sure," he said, trying to be polite. In truth, he found Giri frightening, and her light brown hair made him nervous. He'd always known he came from one of the savage desert tribes, but he'd never realized that there were strands of such light hair among the Surgish. The idea that he might be Surgish was a new and unpleasant one, and he didn't like the way Giri reminded him of it. "I had been afraid that she still hated all of us, but she really seemed to be sad about Chihiro," Kenta went on. "I think she's getting used to us. She asked me for a song yesterday." Hanyu glanced over and saw that his friend was blushing. Kenta made no sense. He was afraid of Antony, who had never done anything but glare, but he wanted the woman who'd threatened his life? It seemed to Hanyu like unthinkably bad taste, but he managed to keep the observation to himself. He'd run his mouth quite enough in the last few days, and he didn't need to hurt anybody else's feelings. "What song?" he asked instead, and Kenta's rapturous recounting of the exchange lasted until they joined the others on the deck. It was an unusually bright sunny day, and most of the other offerings had loosened their robes until the fronts gaped open. A few had undone their tops entirely, leaving the sleeves to dangle from the ties at their waists. Hanyu was pulling his arms from his sleeves to join the second group when he saw Asao coming towards him and Kenta. Asao wasn't exactly limping. His movements were as graceful as ever. Still, he moved slower than usual, and Hanyu wondered whether it might be a sign of injury. "Good morning," Asao said when he joined them. "Good morning," Hanyu replied, and then before he even had time to realize he was going to say it, "Why did you tell Lord Marcus about the fake punishment?" Damn it. So much for all of Hanyu's resolutions to stop blurting things out without thinking. Asao and Kenta stared at him and stole glances at each other. No one said anything, and the silence stretched out until it was almost unbearable. Hanyu squirmed and wished for the 1,000th time that he hadn't been born without whatever mechanism it was that allowed people to decide whether they were going to voice their thoughts or not. Finally, Kenta broke the tension. "I'm going to say hello to Jen. See you later." As soon as he was out of earshot, Hanyu started babbling. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that in front of Kenta. He knew about it already. I mean, he knew about the fake punishment. He didn't know that you told. Why did you tell?" Asao looked so horribly sad and tired that Hanyu was almost sorry he'd asked, but he had to know. He'd picked a fight with his god about this because he'd been unable to believe it was true, but with every moment that his best friend stood there without denying it, Hanyu became more sickeningly sure that it was true after all. "My master asked me a question," Asao said at last. "I couldn't disobey. You know that, Hanyu." Hanyu's voice came out so weak and childish that it made him cringe. "But it was a secret." Asao shook his head. "We don't have secrets from our lords." "Not our own, but this wasn't your secret to tell." "Everything I know is his. Everything I am is his. If you whisper a secret in this ear—" Asao gestured to his head, his eyes wild even as his tone stayed calm and reasonable. "That's Lord Marcus's ear. You know this, Hanyu. It's the same for you and Lord Antony." It should have been. It was what he'd been raised for. Hanyu did know that he belonged to Antony, body and mind both, but still. It's not like that with us, he said, shaking his head. I don't think Antony would like it to be. How nice! Esau practically spat the words, and Hanyu had to fight the urge to take a step backwards. But we don't all need masters who coddle us. I'm strong enough to serve as we are meant to serve, even if you're not. Hanyu froze, then hunched his shoulders against the first hot pangs of shame. Was that true? Was all his master's kindness just a grudging allowance for his own weak, needy nature? Don't be stupid, boy. The thought came without warning, in Antony's exact grouchy cadences. Even in the midst of his distress, Hanyu couldn't repress a smile. Warmth filled him, along with a growing certainty that that was exactly what Antony would say if he were present. The dance, the hug after Hanyu's run-in with Lord Marcus, the gentle soothing after his dream last night, none of that had been given unwillingly. He might not know why Antony chose to offer him so much care, but it was still a choice the god had made. Now that Hanyu wasn't so distracted with fears about his own life, he looked more closely at Esau. It wasn't a comforting endeavor. His friend was breathing hard, even though they hadn't started exercising yet. He looked weak and pale, and despite the heat, he kept his robe fastened tightly right up to his neck. Even so, the fabric didn't quite cover the purple bruises climbing the sides of his throat. Fingerprints? What are you staring at? Esau demanded. Hanyu gestured to his own neck. Did Lord Marcus do that? Esau's hands flew up to cover the marks. That's hardly... It doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Tears sprang to Hanyu's eyes. We should talk to somebody. Esau flushed, and for once Hanyu couldn't tell whether the color in his face came from anger or shame. I deserved it, Hanyu. I made him angry. No one's going to tell my lord he shouldn't punish me when I'm displeasing. Drop it, all right? It was hard to imagine Esau doing anything that displeasing, but perhaps Hanyu's sense of proportion had been skewed by all Antony's lenience. Even before they started their exercises, he felt worn out. It was unpleasant to be reminded of what he was supposed to be after all his recent mistakes, and he hated not knowing where he stood with Antony. By the time they were dismissed below decks, he just wanted to curl up in bed with his god beside him. He followed the others down into the cool darkness, lost in a haze of exhausted self-pity, when he noticed a commotion at the base of the stairs. As the offerings reached the bottom, they seemed to be stopping, and he could hear gasps and murmurs of, "My lord!" "Yes, hello, keep going," grumbled a familiar voice, and Hanyu's whole body sagged in pleasure and relief. "No, don't bow, just go on. Don't mind me. Pretend I'm not here. Hello, yes." When Hanyu reached the base himself and gently nudged an odd, frozen Gen to the side, Antony's rather pained expression fell to a more familiar scowl. "There you are," the god snapped. "Hanging to the back, I see." Hanyu grinned and blinked back sudden tears. "Sorry, my lord." "Come on, then." Antony spun on his heel and marched past the astonished offerings, his long braids swinging. "Let's go back to our rooms." "Yes, my lord." Hanyu was still tired and apologetic, but as he trailed after him, all he could do was smile and run the words through his mind over and over again. Our rooms.